I've never heard anyone approach a Christian and ask the Christian, do you condemn what Breivik did on the media, on the TV or whatever?
Sure.
But Muslims, every time something happens, we're asked to initially, do you condemn this act of terrorism or this act of violence? And I think there's a huge disparity there. What defines me as a human being, my values, my morals, my outlook on life, the way I treat people. For me, everything of that doesn't come from Indian heritage, but comes from my Islamic values. There are inherent inequalities, and there are inherent, let's say, choices being made as to what type of free speech we will allow and what we will not allow. And what I'm saying to you is that just as there is some protection for the Jewish community, there should be some protection for the Christian community and for the Muslim community and people of religion. When the Germans first started with this type of rhetoric, as Professor Norman Finkelstein in a very interesting article wrote, that when those cartoons were being drawn about the Jews, people may have claimed that that was a freedom of speech and a freedom of expression, and that it wouldn't lead to something.
Slippery slope.
Slippery slope.
Slippery slope.
But those cartoons had a very powerful impact. Tony, last time we had a discussion, just as we were leaving, so it was dark and we were hungry, we had to get ready for the food.
Absolutely.
So we had to cut it short.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a good discussion because it was about Salman Rushdie.
Yeah.
And would I be one of the people who would condemn basically what happened to Salman Rushdie? He was obviously attacked by what appears to be a madman with a knife, presumably trying to kill him. A horrible, violent act. And I think what I was trying to get at is that it's not really an appropriate question to ask people to condemn anything, because it has an underlying implication that the individual might not condemn it in the first place, i.e. they may be supportive of a criminal or a violent act. And what I was trying to get at was that the underlying assumption should be that I don't need to ask Tony if he condemns, maybe, supposing you were German. And I said, oh, Tony's from Germany, he's a German. And I said, Tony, do you condemn what Hitler did? And you'd say, I think quite rightly so. But why would you assume that I wouldn't? Why would you ask me that question?
Sure.
And so that's where I was sort of coming at, that I would offer you the respect and the courtesy to assume that Tony's a nice guy, and that, of course, he's going to condemn any illegal, violent act, and certainly genocide on a scale of what Hitler did. I wouldn't have to ask you the question. I would assume that of you anyway. But what I was trying to get at is that for Muslims especially, because when Breivik in Norway went and killed all those people, some 70, I think it was people, and he shot them and he killed them. He's a white Christian with a cross on his manifesto, with, I believe he had inscriptions of quotes of some of the crusades that happened. I've never heard anyone approach a Christian and ask the Christian, do you condemn what Breivik did on the media, on the TV or whatever?
Sure.
But Muslims, every time something happens, we're asked to initially, do you condemn this act of terrorism or this act of violence? And I think there's a huge disparity there. And I think that is also a problem. So one is the underlying assumption. The second one is the inequality of how the very question is asked to both parties, Muslims and non-Muslims. So what's your view on that, really?
I'm trying to mull it over. I can understand why it might be a bit triggering. I hear you. for the record, I don't doubt for 1 minute your personal integrity or that you're a good guy or your moral position or anything. I can understand the social hypocrisy you might be talking about, that there seems to be a two-tier standard, double standard. I'd like to redress that if I could, but I can't, but I think you should be consistent. Nonetheless, I think it's slightly naive to argue that the question doesn't have a pertinence and a relevance. My intent in asking it was not to cast any aspersions on you personally, definitely, because as I said, I think
No,
it's a great guy.
and I said to you from the start that I know you, Tony.
Right.
And quite frankly, you're one of the nicest, if not the nicest people here that I have a conversation with.
Thank you, that's too much.
Actually,
Thank
no,
you.
I actually enjoy our conversations because I think regardless of our disagreements on things, I know it's coming from a good place.
Thank you. And you, and this is what counts. Intent.
Exactly. The niyyah, the intention.
The intention is good.
Exactly.
So my intention in asking the question was simply that I understand we live in a society where a lot of people will be asking the question, is that behaviour indicative of the teaching of Islam? Yes? I don't think that's an unreasonable thing for them to think about, particularly in light of recent history.
But you see, on that point, I don't have a problem with that point.
Okay.
So if somebody, if I was on a, let's say I was on a radio station or a TV station, and the presenter said to me, Abbas, you know, these people are claiming that they're doing it in the name of the faith of Islam. And obviously we non-Muslims who've not studied Islam, we don't know any better, right? They might be, they might not be.
Yeah.
What is the Islamic stance on such and such matter?
Right, this was the question that
but I have no problem with that question.
Oh, sorry, then I should have phrased it like that, because the analogy you gave before was, if I was German and the Nazis, Now that analogy, it's fine, I don't think you meant it disingenuously, but in that analogy, I get born German. It's not something I choose. Being German is not an ideology. Whereas if I was blatantly a Nazi, I would have chosen to embrace an ideology.
Yes.
Insofar as you've chosen to embrace an ideology, and where I'm an outsider to that ideology to some extent, I'm asking the question, in ignorance, in good faith, was that action indicative of the prescriptions of your ideology as you understand your ideology? And I'm asking the sincere hope you'll clarify for me that no, it's not. Because that will heal a lot of relations.
So
and
there are 2 points there. Number one, often, and I do hear this argument, and there are people who, they perpetuate this argument to somehow cause a differentiation between a race and a religion.
And there is a difference.
And they say, well, there are differences, and actually there are similarities, and actually some trump the other, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that. So when they argue, but religion is a choice, and race is not, therefore being a racist is very bad. Being a bigot or a xenophobe against a religion, or to speak derogatory in a derogatory manner of those people of religion is not actually the same. They're very different, and in fact, the one about the religion is it should not be taken seriously. And my contention to that point is, number one, a lot of people are born into a religion.
I'm not saying what you just said, but I am saying something very close.
Okay.
I'm not saying that.
No, but I'm saying that for me, my race, as in my forefathers coming from India, has less importance and less significance as to the very fabric of my being, as does my religion.
Less.
My race to me is irrelevant.
Okay.
So for me, if you were to say to me something about India, I would say that was xenophobic or racist, and I would not be happy, obviously. However, sorry, brother. However, if you said something to me about my religion and my religious convictions, or about my Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that would be far more hurtful, far more derogatory for me than about my race. And what I'm trying to say is, number one, who has the right
Sorry, we're literally on camera.
Sorry, no worries, no worries.
Nice to see. Just,
Who has the right to say that we're going to hold race as a superior and more, let's say, a grounded form of identity than one's religious conviction?
this is really interesting.
Right?
I didn't know the conversation was going to go this way.
Right.
This is interesting.
Right? Because really, just because somebody tells me that they're going to segregate the two in a particular way,
Yeah.
often very arbitrarily, I don't have to accept their notion of value.
No, you don't. But
Right.
presumably you'll be open to,
So that's my first point.
you'll be open to, a credible analysis of the argument.
But that's
You
fine.
wouldn't go and just reject.
No, of course, but that's fine. The other thing is that there are a lot of people, Christian, Buddhist, Jew, Muslim, who are actually born into a religion
Yeah.
and actually stay in that religion as a consequence of them being born into the religion.
Yeah, you're right.
They haven't rationalized.
You're right.
Right. So for them, that is their identity. It is the very fabric of who they are, and actually they haven't even chosen.
That's
They've
not
just
true. No. What you just said, I take issue.
Okay,
Sorry,
please.
I'm trying to remember
No,
the
no.
things you're saying. And I need
Okay,
to bounce
that's
back.
fine. That's fine.
Okay, you've raised an interesting and deeper point here, yeah? Which is the distinction between a race and a creed, yeah? A belief system and a race.
Right.
You've said that you feel more personally affiliated to your religion than you do to your race, yeah?
Yes. And I think the very fabric of
No,
my being,
I hear you.
what defines me as a human
I
being,
hear you.
my values, my morals, my outlook on life,
Yeah,
the way I treat people.
yeah.
For me, everything of that doesn't come from Indian heritage,
Yeah.
but comes from my Islamic values.
I hear
Islamic.
you. So let me propose something to you.
Yeah.
We may be arguing apples and pears here. I think it's entirely natural and correct that you feel more affiliated to your religion than your race. And I would argue maybe the reason for that is precisely because you've chosen it. The fact that you've chosen it makes it more personal and indicative of who you are.
Yes.
Yeah? Whereas your race, just arbitrary.
Right.
Yeah? Okay?
Absolutely.
So you're looking at it from the inside out.
Yes.
And you're looking at it from the inside out and how it feels to be on the receiving end of this stuff. And I think your analysis is correct. However, we're looking at it from another position, which is how you look from the outside in. So it's not, you're talking about how you evaluate yourself. We're talking about how I should evaluate you. How an outsider should evaluate you. It's a different frame of reference. From my frame of reference when I'm evaluating you, it's very important I put some boundary conditions on myself and go, the aspects of this person which are inevitabilities are sacrosanct. Yeah? I cannot condemn or praise somebody for the accident of their condition or things they don't choose. So my feeling is very different because you're not me. However, it's beholden on me to make an evaluation of the choices you make. And the fact that those are the most personal aspects of you to you, I have to respect that. But nonetheless, I'm totally within my rights to evaluate your choices.
Of course.
Just as I must evaluate my own, and you must feed me back
that's
mine.
that's a giver.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to say to you is that, and of course I'm not saying you're making this argument, by the way, it's okay to bash people of religion,
Yeah,
bash their traditions and their religion and their prophets,
yeah.
and say derogatory and vulgar things, which is often what people do and say, because that's not equal to racism. Anis.
Hang on, I've got too many.
Yeah.
You haven't got enough.
So that's
have a clip. What?
Because that's not equal to.
Oh, what? You won't let him?
No, because what it is that I'll explain to you afterwards, but
Okay.
there's a reason for that. That's not equal to. And one of the very important things that you said, which was that from your side looking in,
Yeah, the hierarchies are different.
right?
My side.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But in a civilized society
sure.
where we appreciate one another
Yeah,
and we recognize each other in terms of, with kindness and wanting to be fair and wanting to be just.
yeah,
If you said to me, I'm passionately about veganism, this is my passion, I revolve my entire life around it, I lecture about it, I talk about it, I might think that, you know what, that's fine, that's your belief. I'm going to mock you and make fun of you, and I'm going to ridicule you. And if any vegan anywhere goes and does an act of violence or something, you're going to be also responsible for that. That would be inappropriate, I think, and unjust.
It would be unjust and fallacious reasoning.
Fallacious.
But it wouldn't be unreasonable for you to just ask me the question.
But what I would do is this.
What?
Being a kind person, I hope, or trying to be a kind person, I would say, look, Tony has some real core sensibilities and love for this thing. I might think that he's wrong. But what I'm going to do is at least have the discourse, but I'm going to remain respectful. Because I'm not going to deliberately ridicule him in order to cause him pain and suffering and embarrassment and hurt, because that's not a nice thing to do.
Agreed.
It's not a kind thing to do.
Agreed.
But I know that you're not like that. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there are people who feel that they can be we're not talking about criticism here. We're not talking about debate or discussion here. We're not talking about disagreeing. I think all of those things are valid. But we're talking about a particular ethos that's being fashioned. That it's perfectly okay to say pretty much anything you want about religion or religious people, and they just have to lump it. They have to just accept it because this is under the freedom of speech.
You're widening this fast. Can I start responding?
But let's go to the second point as well.
No.
Okay.
Let me respond to what you said. Okay. You've identified we agree on niyyah, we agree on motive.
Yes.
And you've emphasised that people who say things they know will be hurtful to other people, that this is the impact, the negative impact this has, and I hear your point, okay? But I contextualise it like this. The ideal is not to act in that way, The ideal is not to aim to offend people. However, you've got to ask how far from that ideal is someone permitted to fall within a wider social context?
It's a very good question, actually.
Okay? So if you reframe it like that, I think we can all agree, no, don't be rude to what will offend people's profound inner sensibility. But within a wider social discourse, how far are we willing to let people fall from that ideal? Because there have been times when people fall from that ideal, and that debate has actually informed further growth back towards the ideal. It's a constructive cycle, which is why I'm actually very much in favour of free speech. And I think, although I don't think being rude and abusive to other, not abuse, being rude and detrimental to other people's heartfelt beliefs, I don't think is ideal behaviour, but ultimately I wouldn't condemn it within a social context. I do really believe in freedom of speech. I really do not believe in censorship because I don't think it serves the bigger goal of achieving the ideals that we want. The two things are connected. You only get the best because you've got the strength to descend down into some of the worst,
You see, the problem with that is this. We do have a structure in this country that, for example, protects Judaism. So there are certain things that you can say and certain things that you cannot say because they are under the definition of being anti-Semitic. There is protection for the Sikh community, for example, because they're seen as a racial identity. By the way, as the Jews are, even though all Jews are not Semitic, because you have Polish, Russian Jews, and they're not Semites. They're not from the descendants of necessarily from Abraham or Moses, for example. Right?
I got a question.
So the point is this, but I agree with you that those limits that we set mustn't stifle free speech.
To the point where feelings may get hurt.
I agree. But what we should not do is be hypocritical. So when somebody holds a banner up and says, "Not my king," and then that guy's arrested and shoved away, to me that's a hypocritical thing now. Because you're saying you can have free speech, but even if you demonstrate peacefully, where you're not screaming and shouting at people, you're going to get arrested, potentially convicted, potentially possibly jailed, whatever. To me, that's now hypocritical. Now, I don't see all the people who are quite happy for Islam and Muslims, for example, to be misrepresented, slandered and, you know, spoken about in the most vile ways,
Yeah.
I don't see all those people jumping up and saying, oh, you know, we shouldn't allow this. But they're quite happy to turn a blind eye to the guy who's been ushered away because he held up "Not my king."
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say to you is that there are inherent inequalities and there are inherent, let's say, choices being made as to what type of free speech we will allow and what we will not allow. And what I'm saying to you is that just as there is some protection for the Jewish community, there should be some protection for the Christian community and for the Muslim community and people of religion. So, for example, there is a...
Can I come back?
Of course you can.
This is interesting. We disagree. We've come up with different solutions to the same problem. The principle you pointed out, social hypocrisy. I agree with you about social hypocrisy. It shouldn't exist. We're all equal. We should all be treated equal in the eyes of the law as much as possible and in the way we treat each other, yeah? And I think hopefully we agree on that principle.
Yes, of course.
So in the interest of equality, we now have two options. We can either equally censor each community in accordance with being sensitive to their feelings. So your argument is that because there is legislature which is very sensitive to Jewish feelings, we should also have legislature which is very sensitive to Christian and Muslim feelings, which would be one way of achieving the ideal and creating equality.
Yes.
I personally think that's not a bad idea, but an even better idea is to have less legislature and be robust enough for communities to go, I know it hurts a bit, but we're big enough to handle it, and this open discourse is going to help us to speak more honestly with each other to uphold the more profound ideals we aspire to. Yeah? That. So I think we need to toughen up a bit and be open. We can handle it.
The problem with that, Tony, is this. There's a very interesting quote in a book written by Assistant Professor Todd Green.
Okay.
And the book itself is entitled Presumed Guilty. Actually dealing with this question of why is it that we ask Muslims to condemn illegal acts of terrorism, which I think we should move on to shortly.
Yeah.
But in that book, he quotes a very interesting remark or quote by Rabbi Herschel, and he says, "Words make worlds."
Words make worlds. Okay. Yeah.
In other words, what we say or what we allow to be said will assemble the very world that we are living in.
Yeah.
And that's why the words are very important.
Sure.
So when, for example, you have a population in this country who are a minority, Muslims, and you allow open ridicule and a demonization and this feeling of otherization, it has a consequence of how those Muslims are now treated within the society.
Sure.
And so that's what I'm trying to explain to you, that when you don't have boundaries and limits, just as Rabbi Herschel said, words make worlds, we are seeing what world is being created by those words. So Muslim women, for example, are having their hijabs pulled off. They're being assaulted. Our children in schools are being told, you're a terrorist because your name's Muhammad, your name's Ahmed. Where is that coming from? It's not coming from an isolation of, you know, an organic feeling that's just simply permeating through society. This is being engineered.
Hang on, you're pushing.
This
the point
is
now.
being, well,
you're implying malice of forethought.
I'm
and
saying,
everything. As you say,
no,
engineered.
But I'm saying, no, but when I say engineered, I'm saying that when you allow rhetoric that is deeply condescending and insulting and demonizing a group, then it is but obvious that you will have a portion of any population that will behave irrationally towards those people because they'll believe all the things that they read or they've heard. So what I'm saying to you is that it's very important. I agree that there should be an element of freedom, that we should not stifle valid and genuine discourse and discussion. But when we open up the floodgates, what we find is organizations many of whom, for example, today are very right-wing American-funded organizations who deliberately perpetuate false information about Muslims to create a divisive society and to weaken the very interaction that we, our communities, are having. So it's very, very important that we have some controls where we say, okay, what are the boundaries? So, for example, I believe it's perfectly reasonable if I start saying insulting things about the Prophet Moses, peace be upon him. That a Jew can say, look, that's anti-Semitic, because my people are the descendants of Moses. This is at the very fabric of our culture, of our religion, and you're demonizing and you're ridiculing that, and that's not right. And I think similarly, there should be some controls about what you can say about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, if you have...
Go on, let me respond to something.
I will do.
Because my memory won't retain the point.
I do go on a bit. Go on, please.
No, you...
Please, go on. So words make worlds.
Inevitably, words have power. Inevitably, they can have negative effects. Inevitably, there will be elements in the community who will abuse those words and will backlash. These things will happen. All I'm counter-arguing is when those inevitabilities arise, there'll be the lesser of two evils. If you look at the big picture in the long term, if you allow people to use these harmful words, etc., they're out in the open, and then you can rebut them based on merit in the open. If our positions are really robust, yes? I mean, I'm more than happy if somebody wants to argue against the Holocaust. There'll be people who'll go, you shouldn't be able to say that, it's offensive. I understand you feel offensive if the Holocaust is denied. Nonetheless, I'm sorry about your feelings, but I have enough faith in the integrity that the Holocaust really did occur. It was appalling, it can be proved, and if you're in denial of it, you should be publicly exposed. That I'm saying bring it on. Even though you've got hurt feelings, it's the lesser of two evils. If you don't let that happen, you end up with people going, these damn Jews, you know, they're starting to control the media, yeah, and they're starting to make us be too cautious about their feelings, and we're no longer able to look at facts, and this will fester in the long term into something that becomes precisely the thing the censorship was designed to stop. You need to, so do you want to build the bubble up and then it'll pop, or do you want to slowly let the argument bleed out into the open in the daylight where we can shoot these ideas down?
I'll tell you why that doesn't work.
Do you not see anything persuasive in what I said at all?
I'll tell you why that doesn't work.
Is it that black and white?
No.
It's not about gradation.
No.
Okay.
I'll tell you why that doesn't work.
Go on.
If we could clone Tony, who's a nice guy.
Thank you. We're both nice guys. We've more than established that.
Who listens to the arguments, who makes his assessment based upon good rationale and reason, and evidence and investigation, we wouldn't have a problem.
For the plebs out there,
the reality is that psychologists tell us that there are two types of people. There are concept-driven and there are data-driven people. And their analysis shows that most people are actually concept-driven, not data-driven. And what that means is that they already have a predisposition to believe certain things. Religion is inferior. Religion is illogical. Religion is irrational. It's for medieval people. There's no real argument. There's no evidence. Okay? They have these underpinnings. When you feed that monster, even falsehood, they don't use reason or data to overpower or overcome their predispositions. They only choose for confirmation bias to feed that monster that they've created.
Everything you're saying, I already acknowledged in the example.
Now, in a society where the majority would be perhaps data-driven, your concept could actually work, where you allow people to have freedom to pretty much say anything, and most people being rational, dealing with the data, would still arrive at a more rational, logical, and a correct stance. But your experience and mine would hopefully show you that that's not the case. Most people don't.
That was not the scenario I described.
Okay.
I clearly described, I agreed with your point that there will be a demographic of the population who will be precisely of the mindset you said, who will inevitably cause problems, it will hurt people, and it's bad news, But I contextualize that within a wider framework by going, it's the lesser of two evils. I understand that will happen. My answer to you is, to an extent, and I'm not trying to be condescending, have faith. Have faith in the righteousness of our own position, and that in the light of day it can be argued and will win through against the darker forces you're describing. Don't hide from it. This is a form of hiding. It is a form of saying, I need a wall put between me and them because in some sense I'm too sensitive or not robust enough. But I have faith that I have sufficient robustness that I can tackle these arguments head on and win them on their own merit, point by point, and that creates overall the ideal and optimum environment that we aspire to.
But first of all, the world is not full of Tonys.
I already said I'm acknowledging the bad people.
But the point is
I never said they were full of Tonys.
I understand. But
I'm saying I'm one of the people who can fight the bad people you're talking about and win.
I understand. The point I'm trying to make to you here is this. That first of all, you make a claim that it's the lesser of two evils.
I believe.
Right, exactly. It's an assumption you've made.
It's a conclusion I've drawn based in good faith on reasonable evidence when I'm aiming for the good based on equality and self-consistency. I might be wrong, but there's a cogent argument for saying
I would argue that I don't believe it is the lesser of two evils. Because I believe the damage it causes, because what you said is that you have faith in the future.
I have faith that our ideals
in the future, that people may align themselves to a more reasonable position about not hating or being derogatory towards, xenophobic towards Muslims. And I would argue that that's faith. You're thinking positively and good about people, but I think I'm being perhaps more realistic, where I'm saying that actually the world doesn't work like that, Tony. And this is what the Jewish community and many other historians, they said that when the Germans first started with this type of rhetoric, as Professor Norman Finkelstein in a very interesting article wrote, that when those cartoons were being drawn about the Jews, people may have claimed that that was a freedom of speech and a freedom of expression, and that it wouldn't lead to something.
Slippery slope.
Slippery slope.
Slippery slope.
But those cartoons had a very powerful impact. And I'm not saying that they were the only or the singular or even perhaps most of what was created came from those cartoons. But nevertheless, they played a part in changing the perception of the people about a minority who were living in their country, and where it ended is the exact thing that what I believe that Rabbi Herschel was trying to get at, that words make worlds, that when we allow unfettered words to be spoken, it creates a world, and depending upon the words that are used, that's the world that you will end up with. And this notion that you have, Tony, that it's the lesser of two evils, I respect that it's your opinion, but it's just your opinion.
Hang on, you're better than that. Please never use that argument.
I wasn't saying it in a derogatory way.
No, but that word just.
Yeah.
Okay?
No, I'm just...
The conversation we're having is both our opinions.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Well, it's just my opinion as well.
Exactly.
I'm not trying to trivialise it.
No, because I'll upgrade our opinions. We have opinions. If we differ, if we believe there is absolute truth, and you and I both do, then if there's a conflict of opinion, one of us is probably more on point than the other. Maybe it's you, maybe it's me. But I wouldn't want to keep putting us both on the same playing field and going, it's just an opinion. We're trying to weigh the merits of these opinions.
Of course.
Now, maybe my lesser of two evils argument is wrong, but I'd like to see the logical and moral reasons to validate
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah?
That's a good point. So we have some studies now that are showing since September 11, the Twin Tower attacks, there has been for example, analytically you can prove, there has been a disproportionate reporting of criminal activities that are committed by Muslims. And there is a disproportionate amount of articles and data that's being released about people who are non-Muslims. Now, this is having an effect, because what people are assuming is...
Sorry, are you saying that the data on the data on crime has been distorted and misrepresented
Yes.
to overemphasize Muslim
Right,
crime.
right.
I can't comment on the validity of that data, okay?
But
let's assume for a minute you're right.
Well, what I do is that, by all means, research what I'm telling you.
Right.
It's
But
very easy to...
It doesn't matter. Modally,
Right.
we can cover it.
Anyway.
Assuming you're right, yes, I condemn it.
So now there are some results from freedom of speech,
Yeah.
because you could claim, well, this is their freedom of speech. They're saying what they want to say.
No, hang on.
Yeah, because...
No, hang on. No, you could. No. Sorry. If your job is to report statistical data on crimes within a jurisdictional framework,
It's not, I'm not
that's
saying,
no longer you
I'm
sharing
not
your
saying
personal
statistical
opinion.
data.
Oh, I thought
I'm saying the amount of references that are being made
Yeah.
are disproportionate to Muslims. So, for example, if a Christian white person does a crime, his religion will not be mentioned in the article.
Okay, so you're saying
But
there's a
Muslims-
reporting bias to emphasize
Right.
Muslims.
So now what you could argue is, well, this is a free society
Yeah.
with a free press who can report it however they want to report it.
Yeah.
But the result of that is it's giving people a skewed analysis.
Confirmation bias.
Right. I'll give you another example.
I get it.
You heard the headlines of 83% of paedophile gangs in Rotherham and in these places are Pakistani, Asian,
Yeah.
Muslim men.
Yeah.
Right. Now, this was a report that was widely reported on the media,
Yeah.
debated on radio, on television.
Tommy Robinson and all that, yeah.
What makes their culture, what makes their religion want to behave in this way?
Yeah.
That was the assertion. Now, did you know that paedophile rings is another definition of paedophilia?
Yeah.
It's a different organizational, concept. Happens to be 100% white,
I don't know how I don't know
right?
how
So 100%
accurate
of
the data you're giving
okay,
me is.
I'm
to
giving you the
respond.
data, but you can always check me out, right?
If you want me to, you
Now-
want me to respond on the data you're giving me, let's do it on the basis
Look at
that
the
I
works of
assume it's
Ella
correct.
Cockbain.
Okay, but
Professor Ella Cockbain.
Abbas, just for a second, let
Yeah.
me try and take the reins of it. I'm happy to respond to your assertions and go on. If you're right,
Yeah,
then I
fair
think
enough,
this.
fair enough.
But I don't just want to respond
That's
to them
fine.
on the basis they are
That's
correct.
fine.
Because I simply don't.
That's fine, and I respect that.
Okay.
So if you look at the works of I think she's a clinical psychologist, Ella Cockbain.
Okay.
She wrote specifically about this issue. And she said this is a subset of a subset deliberately orchestrated in order to catch a particular group.
Yeah.
And the result of that is that, now I'll give you a personal story. Okay?
Okay.
I remember, I drive for a living, right?
You drive.
I drive for a living, right?
Okay.
Around about that time, a white English lady said to me, "Oh, you're not going to rape me, are you?"
Okay.
I was like flabbergasted.
Yeah, I'm sure you were mortified.
I was mortified.
Can I respond?
And I said, why would you say that?
Yeah.
Oh, you know these things that are happening. And so I saw a direct result
I'm sure.
of freedom of speech
Yeah.
causing somebody to now be fearful of a Muslim man,
Yeah.
thinking that I would be deplorable and inhumane to that level.
But fortunately, you are such a nice person,
Well, I
and
wish
the
I
truth
was.
of your character is such that I'm sure that you had a fighting chance of disavowing her of a misconception.
I was so flabbergasted that actually I was, for the first time in my life, maybe not the first time in my life, but I was left fairly speechless because I was so hurt.
Okay.
I was so upset.
I'm sorry you felt that
And
way.
I said to her, why would you even think something like that?
Okay.
But what I'm trying to explain to you, Tony, and I hope,
I'm hearing you.
I hope you can appreciate what I'm saying.
I do. You have to let me come
Yeah,
back
please.
a bit. Okay? I'd ask you, how many, you said a white woman came in and said, "Are you a rapist?" I'd say to you, your feelings are very hurt by that. To contextualise it, how many white women got into your cab and didn't ask you if you were a rapist?
No, that's not relevant.
No, it's completely statistically relevant in terms of
I'll tell you-
Bayesian statistics, which I think
no, but I'll tell you why that's not relevant.
No, it's totally.
No, but I'll tell you why it's not
But
relevant.
if you're you're only going to be hypersensitive, if you're only going to be sensitized to when you hear the negative and not contextualize it within the broader scope of the positive or the neutral, you yourself will become part enrolled in the cognitive bias that you're condemning. Each of us has a responsibility to try and see reality as clearly, objectively, and balanced.
I'll tell you why, but let me explain to you why it's not relevant as to how many people said that to me.
Go on.
Because there are certain underlying assumptions that everyone that would feel suspicious of a Muslim would be open enough to actually air their suspicion. And the reality is that the English people, I would regard myself as, culturally very English, right? We tend to keep our cards very close to our chest, right?
Yeah.
We don't always tell people what we're thinking.
Yeah.
So the first thing there is that just because only a small minority of people are emboldened enough to act upon it, doesn't mean that there is a huge underlying feeling of distrust of the Muslim community. And there are reports that have come out where dinner table Islamophobia and comments against Islam and Muslims are actually very commonplace. And it was actually found to be more so within middle class structures.
I'm not assuming your facts are right. Even if your facts are right, my position still holds. I think in the long term, you build in more unconscious resentment when you tell people, no, you can't talk about something. Then you say to them, if you want to share your inner demons in public, go ahead and I'll take you on and I'll win on merit. I think psychologically it's not astute to try and contain people. Sharing honestly, everybody needs platforms to share their honest feelings. So as Jordan Peterson would say, and he may not be flavour of the month at the moment with the Muslims, I can get that. But as Peterson would say, we have to be able to speak our minds out loud so that other people can correct us on how damn stupid we are. If you just keep it in your own head, the rest of the community won't censor you and you'll disappear off into some bubble of your own cognitive bias. It's very important. I know it's not pleasant, but we have to be emotionally robust enough. Now, if you're really feeling very, very oppressed and on the edge of being picked on the street, and I'm very sorry, I don't want to encourage that, and it's completely out of order. But the slippery slope argument that you alluded to, I hate the slippery slope argument because it's good to identify where there is a slippery slope, but it shouldn't be an excuse for occasionally not climbing the mountain. Sometimes you have to look at a slippery slope, recognise it's dangerous, and then proceed with caution. Otherwise, you don't climb and ascend to the better place. It's necessary to know which mountains to climb. I think this mountain of free speech, although it's very Western, and the Western can be synonymous with decadence, which the Muslims are attuned to. We have become too decadent, probably. Nonetheless, on the swings and roundabouts, the slippery slope of free speech, I think, pays the best long-term benefits for the society and the individual. I honestly do. Now, I might be wrong, but it's not a fallacious or ill-founded. It's an argument you should consider as a possibility and not just.
Look, I've heard what you've said, and I disagree. First of all, I don't believe any society anywhere in the world has free speech.
Well, you're right. I don't believe in absolute, because I don't believe in incitement. So we're drawing a line at incitement.
So what we're saying is, we're not saying within the normative sense. We're saying free speech that's still curtailed and has controls.
Short of incitement.
Whatever that might. Well, it could be incitement. It could be, for example, you have people who are providing false medical information for people to follow, which is, I think, quite sensibly removed, because if people were to act upon that false medical information, it could cause them very detrimental reactions.
Yeah, we agree that there are basic lines, boundary conditions.
There are basic boundary conditions that every society has. So in reality, there is no such thing as free. Free. We both agree with that.
We don't agree. So the question becomes, The question becomes, now, where should the boundary be set?
Now that
you're setting the boundary at. You're setting the boundary to some extent at if my feelings.
Well, let me make my point, because you spoke for quite a while, Tony.
Have I?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So that's the first point. That there is no actual
absolute free speech. We agree.
And I think quite sensibly, people can recognise that there have to be certain limits. Because if you don't have limits, then it becomes potentially anarchy, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, who decides to set those limits? Very important.
Sure.
Right. And I believe that there should be certain basic principles that should be established.
Agreed.
That they should be regarded as limits.
Agreed.
Set. And I said to you that if we set those limits, for example, with the Jewish community, I would say as a Muslim, why don't you offer me the same courtesy? Why don't you offer me the same protection?
That makes sense.
And I think it's reasonable, right?